Hello guys, so we are now in El Salvador at Plan B Forum, and here with you Anna Tutova, co-founder of Coins.Telegram, and our guest Peter Todd, who is actually was named as Satoshi by one HBO documentary, but he is not, but he's really Bitcoin AG who discovered Bitcoin back in 2010, and as well he's the founder of Open Timestamps, and he will tell us more about his journey. Great to have you here, Peter.
Yeah, thank you.
So can you tell us about your background and how did you discover Bitcoin first?
Well, I mean, even when I was in high school, like many people, I thought freedom of speech seems kind of cool, and I got interested in this anonymous censorship-resistant publication mechanism called the Freenet Project. But then I quickly realized, as interesting as it is to be able to publish data, to publish text, images, whatever, that's not really that useful for political change without the ability to go send money over the internet. And that's, of course, when I started learning about cryptography and eCash. And, obviously it seemed like, something like Bitcoin should exist. And quite famously, myself and Adam Back Hal Finney were all talking on a mailing list trying to go and invent Bitcoin. So as much as we all failed, certainly when I learned about Bitcoin again,
So which year did you connect with them?
This was back in 2001 or so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well before Bitcoin was ever invented. But, we were trying to invent Bitcoin.
So you were
failed.
In your 20s then?
No, I was 16.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, but we were trying to invent Bitcoin and failing. So, of course, when I saw Bitcoin again, I read the white paper, I think it was about 2009. Honestly, my reaction was, damn it, I should have thought of that. It just seemed so obvious. It seemed so obvious it would work. Mm-hmm. And, at the time I was doing university and I had a full-time job. So, didn't have much time to really look into it. But eventually I kind of quit all that and went into Bitcoin full-time at about 2014 or so. Mm-hmm. But honestly, it was first time I read that white paper, it's just so obvious this is something that could work. It doesn't necessarily mean it'll catch on, but it obviously could work.
So did you buy Bitcoin back then, or did you start mining or anything like that?
I got into mining kind of late. But I think I bought my first Bitcoin maybe in probably 2011 or something. Mm-hmm. So, very early. But I wasn't in it as an investor. I was in it for someone who's interested in tech.
Mm-hmm. And in what did you see the value of Bitcoin?
Oh, obviously, if you send money over the internet without third parties, that just obviously has value. Mm-hmm. It's a decentralized means of payment and store of value. That clearly has value. And it did not take any convincing for me to believe that. Obviously, things like this, they A, need to work, and they B, need to have a certain amount of social inertia. If you're the only person in the world who uses Bitcoin, it's kind of useless. But obviously Bitcoin was able to get past those humps. Mm-hmm. And at least for the does it actually work thing, I did contribute, with many other people, to making it actually work.
Yeah, and as well, do you use now Bitcoin in everyday life or just purchases?
Fairly often. Especially in a place like El Salvador, where a lot of places accept Bitcoin. And, professionally, when I do consulting work, basically all my pay comes in on Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess you started accepting Bitcoin back from the early days.
Oh, yeah. The first time I was paid with Bitcoin professionally would probably have been in 2013 maybe. Mm-hmm. And, I work full-time on this and related technology, and the simple reality is the easiest way for the vast majority of my clients to pay me is just send me Bitcoin.
So what do you consult on currently, mostly?
A bunch of stuff. One example, even while I was here, I was at the Plan B, what do they call it, the Plan B class, basically helping people, helping new developers learn how Bitcoin works, how to contribute to Bitcoin, and so on. So I was teaching stuff there. In my particular case, I was teaching class on how coin joins work. And I also had some panel discussions about, how Lightning works and things like that. In addition to that, of course, speaking at the conference, while I'm not paid to speak here, I do get my expenses paid. Mm-hmm. And again, that's all over Bitcoin. And another example is my work at Open Timestamps, which I think you mentioned earlier. Yeah. And Open Timestamps is a tool to timestamp data. Mm-hmm. And it does this currently through the Bitcoin blockchain. Because, Bitcoin blockchain is one of your most widely witnessed data structures. very strong security behind it, so it gives reasonably good timestamp accuracy. And again, this is an example. Well, the people paying me to work on that, it's just Bitcoin's obvious way to pay.
Yeah, so can you tell more about open timestamps? How did the idea come to you, and which year did you launch it?
Well, you know, timestamping has always been one of these things where it's obviously useful, but it was always hard to implement. Now, of course, for the useful part, well, what it really comes down to is the bad guys don't have time machines. If you can go prove that a piece of data existed in the past, very frequently that lets you rule out attacks on that data. You know, if you knew something was created well prior to like some compromise happened to your system, well, that data is still good. An example that used in Bitcoin Core itself is source code gets timestamped. So like it's digitally signed with PGP keys, but then on top of that it's timestamped. Now, if someone's PGP key is compromised, we can use the timestamp to verify that the data, the signature, was created prior to the compromise. Thus, it's still good. And timestamping as an idea has been around for a very long time. You know, as an example, like the startup, well, at the time, startup Guard Time, I think they got in business in like maybe 2001, 1990 years there, 1999 or something. It was a long time ago. But the problem with solutions like Guard Time is they're always based on trust. Guard Time is an entity you're trusting for the timestamp. And the moment Guard Time screws up, every timestamp is called in question. So what's beautiful about Bitcoin is the Bitcoin blockchain, every block has a time field. And Bitcoin needs that for technical reasons around how proof of work works. But a service like Open Timestamps can then leverage that to then insert data into the Bitcoin blockchain that other data is committed to. And what I mean by that is, you know, your piece of data that you timestamp with Bitcoin is not actually in the blockchain. Nothing about your data is directly in the blockchain, but there's a sequence of mathematical operations that can only be done in one direction that lead to something in the blockchain. And since it can only be done in one direction, you can follow those mathematical instructions all the way to a Bitcoin block header. And now I know your data was created prior to that Bitcoin block. Thus, your data existed prior to the time in that Bitcoin block.
So what are your who are your customers mostly for?
Well, me personally, my customers are kind of like customers of customers, or you know, services. So a lot of my funding for Open Timestamps has lately come from a company called Simple Proof. And they are building commercial solutions so that downstream clients can better use timestamping. And they solve a lot of problems that I'm just not interested in solving. You know, a lot of things like, all right, who is the business entity who keeps these records? You know, how do you go integrate it into like a business process? And, you know, that's valuable work, but it's just not something I want to do. So I let them do that, and then I work on the back-end tech. Another example is there have been people who've just straight up donated money because they want timestamping to do better.
So why do they need timestamping for donating?
Well, it really comes down to, you know, and this is open source in general. A lot of people need something to be done, and they're happy to go pay someone to do it, even if it's not an exclusive basis. You know, it's as simple as that.
So is this project open source?
Absolutely. Completely open source, free to use. For technical reasons, it is centralized, although, you know, timestamping is not like Bitcoin. Timestamping, the centralization isn't a concern the way it would be in Bitcoin. You know, and of course on top of that, I mean, there's many other consulting things I do. I mean, people pay me to do research on Bitcoin. If you go to my blog, petertodd.org, there's a lot of posts there that were actually paid by the people who needed certain things researched. You know, and also in the past, I've contributed to Bitcoin Core directly. One example is the opcode check clock time verify that's used by Lightning, among other things. Check clock time verify, I was actually paid to implement because someone saw it needed to be done and they're happy to pay me.
That's nice. And as well, what do you think about Bitcoin layer 2s?
Well, I mean, you know, Lightning obviously works. If you go around El Salvador, basically every time you pay for something with Bitcoin, they're going to accept Lightning. Like, that debate is kind of over. Bitcoin layer 2s obviously are the way to go use Bitcoin. Now,
But besides Lightning, we saw, especially last year, there was craziness around Bitcoin layer 2s. A lot of VC funds put
funny enough,
money into
that was one of my consulting projects I did recently. So I got paid a fair bit of money to go and carefully research for a couple months all of these different solutions and how they all work. And I think one of the big takeaways from that is that Lightning is really good. There's a lot of things that want to improve on Lightning in different ways, but what's notable about them is their improvements on Lightning. And one of the very few genuine L2s that anyone's ever come up with is this thing called Arc, which is in some ways a layer under Lightning, because in Lightning, I go send you money by changing a balance between us. In Arc, you own an actual UTXO that could exist, but doesn't. And the point of that is, if you need it to exist because you need to get on chain, you can. But generally, you're hoping that it doesn't have to exist, you don't have to pay that fee. And Arc's very interesting, but funny enough, the main thing we kind of envision Arc to be used for is actually to build Lightning channels on top of it. Which gets back to, Lightning is really fundamental tech. It seems to be something fundamental about how money works, how value transfer works. The fact that Lightning makes sense says something about the universe, if you will. And funny enough, there's another technology, even pre-Bitcoin, called Ripple. Now, you may have heard of Ripple, the coin, which is a thing that kind of took the name. It's nothing to do with Ripple, the idea. But Ripple, the idea, was you could create a payment network by having people transfer money between trust relationships. So like if I trust you, and you trust her, and she trusts him, and so on and so forth, well, I can
was it as well on blockchain, or is it...
Not at all. It was just an accounting system. It's like I could send money through you and through many other intermediaries all the way to a destination, so long as each pair of people trust each other. Funny enough, that has been implemented. It's called Hawala, which is based on personal relationships. Another variant of this is how banking itself works. And Ripple was an idea, well, let's digitize this to make it more efficient. Well, Lightning is kind of the same idea, but adding smart contracts so that the payments can actually happen through math, not trust.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
And as well, we are currently in El Salvador, the first country which adopted Bitcoin as a legal tender. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, keep in mind, I mean, El Salvador just basically changed the law, so it's no longer really a legal tender. And, honestly, I think a lot of Bitcoiners try to downplay this, but this is a loss for Bitcoin. Now, from El Salvador's point of view, it's probably a win for them, because I'm sure they got a much better deal from the IMF than they otherwise could have.
Some people joked that they could launch a meme coin and they could raise much more money that way.
Yeah, the IMF probably wouldn't be happy with this, but from what I've heard, looking into details of the loan they got much better terms than they would have otherwise. Because it's fair to say that in this case, El Salvador used Bitcoin as leverage against the IMF. Now, an interesting question here is, will other countries do the same thing? I think out of the countries around the world, Argentina is one that might be in a position to do this. They have the right kind of politics right now.
But their president told that he doesn't plan to adopt Bitcoin as official currency. But
never say never.
Generally, he's pro-crypto.
I mean, keep in mind his view. He's libertarian enough. He's been trying to get rid of the idea of legal tender to just allow people to accept whatever they want. And of course, you look at the Argentinian peso, it just keeps on declining in value. So it kind of says something like they want to get out of that business. But it's hard to say what will happen. But certainly, seeing El Salvador do what they do, I would not be surprised if another country decides, you know what, let's do this whole legal tender thing and see if we can get a couple $1 billion from the IMF. It's a good deal.
Well, Central African Republic already did that, but still not
that
much progress was
my understanding was that was kind of a different case. That was more about corruption in the government, but I don't know too much about the details of that. But, El Salvador, it certainly looked like a genuine effort. And I got to point out, I mean, El Salvador, a very large percentage of the economy is remittances. Anytime you can create infrastructure that competes with Western Union, for a country like El Salvador, that helps save everyone money. Even if they don't use Bitcoin, the fact that they could means Western Union has to charge less fees. And that adds up.
Yeah, and as well, what do you think about the current crypto situation in the US and Trump plans to adopt Bitcoin?
I mean,
for the result?
the Bitcoin community is extremely lucky that Trump got elected. Like it or not, the way Democrats were going, they were on a path to completely ban Bitcoin. Like that's just how left-wing politics in the U.S. works. And we are lucky that Trump got elected, lucky that all this stuff's changing. Doesn't mean it's going to be necessarily that good, but the U.S. and the Bitcoin community is much better off with Trump than otherwise.
So you think that Bitcoin reserve for the US will be really good thing?
Oh, I don't know it'll even happen. I mean, I don't even think like you gotta understand, it's not about the things Trump does for Bitcoin that I think is most important. It's that the Democrats were clearly on a path to ban Bitcoin. The narratives coming out of them, including Kamala herself, was, yeah, we want to get rid of this. We want to ban it. We want to control it. And I am sure had Democrats won, 4 more years, Bitcoin would have been heavily restricted in the U.S., maybe entirely banned.
And as well, how do you see the institutionalization of Bitcoin? And last year they approved Bitcoin ETFs. Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
I mean, I've got to point out, it's inevitable as Bitcoin gets bigger. Like, how could you have Bitcoin get bigger without institutions getting involved? It just doesn't make any sense. Now, that certainly can have minuses if this results in regulation that controls how we can use Bitcoin. And it certainly means that there are players on the table that didn't exist, say, in the last soft fork. And I don't really know how that will play out. But if you want Bitcoin to grow, this kind of thing's inevitable. And you just can't avoid it.
But some people have concerns that currently institutionals can manipulate Bitcoin prices a lot with their movements and the supply they have.
It's a market. Like, if that's your kind of concern, you think that'll kill Bitcoin. I mean, you don't really believe very much in Bitcoin. Obviously, people with a lot of money can make the Bitcoin price go up and down a lot by buying and selling. That's just how it is. The thing I'm worried about is regulations that prevent you from using it. And that is something that maybe big institutions help bring about by saying, well, let's go and make Bitcoin safe. But then again, if you want Bitcoin to be bigger, you're going to end up at a size where these big institutions start being interested. You can't have freedom tech if corporations don't have freedom to be involved either.
Yeah. And how do you see the current crypto market situation?
Well, I think what we're seeing is Bitcoin being more and more important. It's interesting looking at Ethereum relative to Bitcoin. It's just a long, continuous decline. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that the promises of all these coins haven't really panned out. They claim to allow all these crazy things. I mean, Ethereum marketed itself as like a world computer. It doesn't even mean anything. It doesn't make sense. But they got away with that marketing for so long. And then finally, I think the market's waking up to, this is actually nonsense. What matters is being able to move money and having a technology that actually works. And Bitcoin is that technology. Now, obviously, people always start new currencies. So, I mean, in Bitcoin, we saw ordinals, inscriptions, and all this. But a lot of that's kind of just degenerate gambling. I'm not going to say that we should ban it. People can do what they want with their money, but we should recognize it for what it is. It's just gambling.
And what do you think about Solana?
Well, I mean, Solana is an example of something which gets a lot of use as payments, not because it's good technology, because it's good enough. If you want to go send someone money instantly, Solana looks like it works pretty well. At some point, there's a good chance the system's going to crash, and the centralization will come to bite people in the ass. But for now, it's cheap, it's easy. It's no surprise people use this. And with Bitcoin, we have to work so hard to create better tech like Lightning to make sure it always works. Things like Solana, they skip steps. They create things that mostly work, but once in a while people get screwed over. And that's just how tech works often. Often the technology that doesn't work very well is one that actually gets market share initially until people realize, actually, I just lost all my money on it. So we'll see.
And as well, do you trade yourself Bitcoin or other crypto?
I mean, of course, technically I trade because obviously I'm getting paid. I got to sell it at some point. Not all my expenses are in Bitcoin, but trading in this sort of the degen sense of like sitting up, looking at the tickers. No, I don't do any of that. I do dollar cost averaging. Like that's the way you should go. Like let people who care about this stuff do trading. chances are they'll lose money anyway.
And do you have any predictions for Bitcoin all-time high this cycle?
What the hell is a cycle? Like, cycle is one of these meaningless terms degenerate gamblers throw out. Cycle this, cycle that. Look at it this way. I know that the lowest Bitcoin is likely to go is 0, and I think the highest it's likely to go is infinity.
Highest what?
The highest Bitcoin's going to go is infinity, because mathematicians haven't come up with a number bigger.
Okay.
Now, I will say that there is this narrative in the Bitcoin community that, Bitcoin's going to go to the moon, it'll go to infinity. And yeah, that's technically true, but you also got to remember, Bitcoin can go to infinity measured against US dollars. That's not the same thing as measured against value. US dollar can inflate away to infinity, but Bitcoin as a value, as a valuable currency, it's not going to go to infinity because the world isn't that big. I think Bitcoin's like the 4th, maybe 5th biggest currency by market cap, depending on what you define, M1 supply or whatever they call it. Like, it's very big, but the world economy isn't that much bigger, and there's only so many more zeros you can go at. I've probably seen Bitcoin's value increase more from when I started in Bitcoin to now than it will ever increase again, just because the world economy is only so big.
And many predictions say that US economy won't be doing that well, and that it will influence as well the crypto market and Bitcoin. What are your thoughts on that? Will Bitcoin follow, or will Bitcoin be a contrarian?
I would like to think that that Bitcoin is not tied to the US economy. It's hard to say. I think so long as the US economy maintains its free nature, the US politics maintains its free nature, Bitcoin could help follow that, mainly because other countries try to go ban it. Certainly, if you're in China, your government doesn't really want you using Bitcoin. If you're in Europe, your governments don't really want you using Bitcoin. US is a pretty free country, so just from that point of view, yes, Bitcoin's value will probably be tied to the US, but we'll see.
And in which regions do you see the biggest adoption of crypto, of Bitcoin?
Well, it depends on what you mean by adoption. Like, in terms of percentage of people who own crypto, US and Canada, as an example, are pretty high. In terms of day-to-day usage, parts of El Salvador might take the cake there. It's hard to say, but I think a lot of like what the Bitcoin community thinks adoption is happening is not what's really going on. A good example of this is I was in Macedonia not that long ago, and I sat down in a currency exchange booth. I was talking to the guy about how Lightning worked. The guy at the booth was interested and sat there for like an hour explaining Lightning. And all the whole time, constantly people are coming in doing remittances. Just sending money to relatives, receiving money from relatives. And they were all just sending some type of USD token on like Binance for the most part. Because they didn't care how it worked. They just needed to send money.
Yeah, that's interesting. And as well, you've been a few times to Ukraine, so can you tell about your impressions of it and how do you see the developments of crypto in Ukraine?
Ukraine's an interesting place because of how free it feels in a lot of ways. A good example of this is, you can go to Kiev and go sell Bitcoin without AML KYC. It's really not a big deal. The first time, actually to be exact, the second time I was there, I wound up going on some urban exploration tour of a bunch of tunnels under the city. And that was just advertised on Airbnb tours. Okay, I'll go do that. In other countries, that would have been behind piles of red tape. But the fact that they could just do that really said something. Now, frankly, I don't know if they're doing that right now in the middle of a war, but technically it was during a war then, because that would have been 2022, just before the full-scale invasion. And yet even then, it's a free enough country, you could just do things. Most recent time I was there was in September, and you go to
last year?
Last year, 2024, and I go to the main bridge in Kiev, and there are people doing rope jumping just off the bridges. Imagine how much paperwork would require to go do that. And even in the conduct of the war, one of the advantages Ukraine has had is it's got enough of a market economy that military contractors are competing with each other. They're all trying to come up with the best drone. All the units are trying to figure out how to buy the best drone, how to do fundraising. It's a type of dynamic that is actually a very free market. And versus, what I would hear from, say, Russia, well, it's kind of a dictatorship, not quite. It's not enough of a dictatorship. I'll give the Russian people a pass. But, you hear how, like, they can't get drones because the military procurement is corrupt and a total mess. Like, it says something about what Ukraine is relative to others. And unfortunately, I am worried that if Ukraine becomes part of the EU, Ukraine's freedom will actually go down. Now, obviously, it could be a big protection for Ukraine, being part of the EU, but like it or not, the EU is going backwards. And unfortunately, that may be a negative. And hopefully the way things evolve will be at least the EU stops going backwards and Ukraine gets the protection it needs no matter what. But it's hard to say.
Well, in terms of regulations of innovation, EU is tough.
Yeah.
And as well, in your opinion, what do we need for the mass adoption of Bitcoin?
Well, I think mass adoption is going to be a lot harder than some Bitcoiners think. And why I say that is it's competition. Bitcoin is in competition with the US dollar, it's in competition with the euro. All of these other currencies, they can change too. It is not a given that currencies inflate forever. Politicians sometimes, not always, but sometimes, they realize that they are losing the battle to other things and they make changes. They stop inflating the currency. They make payments more free, like they reduce regulations. So the fastest route to mass adoption for Bitcoin is other people screwing up, other countries screwing up, but that's not a given. And I'm not going to say it's guaranteed.
That's somehow challenging way for the adoption.
Well, like I was saying about Western Union before, El Salvador, from the remittances point of view, they won, if only by telling Western Union there's a limit to how much you can increase your prices.
Thank you for such interesting conversation. Great to have you.
Thank you.